I've recently moved into a new apartment on the 13th floor. I thought living alone would be the start of something wonderful, but honestly, it's been strange. The streets at night are surprisingly peaceful, but one strange event has been occurring every night in the building across the street. The lights of the apartment parallel of mine would suddenly flicker on and off in the middle of the night for exactly 10 minutes straight. When you're surrounded by a concrete jungle, you don't expect one peculiar window to catch your glance, but it does. It almost became a hobby of mine to watch that window every night. The apartment seemed to be owned by a man in his late 20s or early 30s, and I always got a clear view of his kitchen when he cooked dinner for his guests. Every weekend, he brought a new woman over. None of them looked similar whatsoever, but I noticed they were always adorning their fancy dresses with shiny jewelry. The thing is, I've never actually seen any of them leave the building. Maybe they went through a back door, but it happened every weekend without fail. One day, I was walking down my street when I saw him right in front of me. It was the mysterious owner of the apartment with the flickering lights. He was in no way a celebrity, but I was almost starstruck. That's when I realized I didn't recognize the lobby I stepped into. I had accidentally followed him into the building across the street. Even after I acknowledged my mistake, I decided to keep following him. I'd got into the elevator with him and watched as he moved his finger to click on the button labeled 13. It seemed that he also lived on the 13th floor, completely parallel to me. The man glanced over at me, then back to the elevator buttons, gesturing for me to pick my own number. I shook my head, and he watched me through the corner of his eye as the elevator doors closed. He offered out his hand and said he didn't realize I was a floor neighbor of his. He introduced himself as Lee. I immediately began to panic as he fully acknowledged me. Even though I knew about all his habits and hobbies, I was still a complete stranger in his eyes. So I shook his hand and said a fake name, Charlotte. It was the name of my grandmother, and completely different from my actual name, Jennifer. As he exited the elevator, I followed him from a distance and saw him unlock the door labeled 135. Lee walked into his apartment, glancing over his shoulder to take a final look at me. He smiled, then locked the door behind him. I exited the building, escaping back into my apartment. When I found my back leaned against my closed door, I'd almost wished I stayed longer. What was it like to have someone different accompanying you each night? That night, the routine continued. A beautiful woman sat in the dining room as Lee cooked her dinner in his fancy kitchen. Not once did he ever look back towards me, but he did disappear behind a corner with the curtains drawn. Only his hand was visible as I flipped the light switch in the dining room. I stood there and stared intensely as the lights flickered, but this time, it was in a specific order. It almost seemed like Morse code. I began writing down the sequences on a napkin. HELLOJEN. Hello, Jen. I felt my heart begin beating faster. How did he know my name? The woman sitting at his dining table seemed oblivious to the whole thing as he finished flickering the lights. Her smile never disappeared off of her clueless face. I had a clear view of the whole event. It was horrifying, almost like watching a worm being squished under a shoe. Blood splattered everywhere as he lifted up his butcher knife and let in a clean cut on the back of her neck. Her head didn't completely separate from her body until the second hit. It must have hit the floor with a thud, but all I heard was silence as Lee pointed her lifeless finger at me while empty laughter echoed throughout the room. I quickly drew my curtains and used my phone to anonymously call the police to apartment 135. My entire body felt numb until I heard the police sirens coming down the street. I pushed my curtain aside slightly to get a view of what was happening across the street. His whole kitchen was spotless. It seemed like the police officers came in for a short moment to investigate. then left without finding anything suspicious. Only I knew what was wrong with the seemingly innocent scene. The woman's pearl necklace was strung across his neck like a trophy. As he closed the door behind the police officers, he looked directly across the street into my window, smiled, before putting his index finger to his mouth. He was telling me to keep quiet. The next morning I went to my office job, agonizing about what I'd seen the night before. When I made it back to my building, I ran to catch the elevator just before it closed. I stood in the elevator, trying to catch my breath, before I realized the doors weren't closing. My eyes trailed down in horror, as a hand was caught in between the doors. The doors slowly separated to reveal Lee, wearing that woman's necklace across his neck.
I didn't realize you lived so close to me, Jennifer. I'll have to come over soon.
I started taking the stairs after that. No matter what I did to avoid him, he was always there, waiting in the lobby or somehow in front of my apartment door. My only escape was when I went to work. He kept inviting women over every night, leaving his curtains wide open to give me a show. I had to admit, no one was forcing me to watch him. It was like an unspoken, private showing, just between the two of us. He used the flickering lights to ask me questions. 5 S T A R S. 5 stars? Lee left notes on my door, with 5 hand-drawn, empty stars on them. He was asking me to rate the show. Sometimes there were even notes on the back of them, asking me to come over for dinner. One night, I found him waiting outside of my apartment. At that point, I'd almost become an accomplice because of how many times I let him entertain me. This time, I held open the door for him to come inside. He had a pleasantly surprised face, then followed me in. I needed him to have a taste of his own medicine. As Lee sat down across the dining table from me, I found myself realizing how he must have felt. It was almost empowering to have someone in your territory, oblivious to what's to come next. I wasn't like all the other clueless girls that followed Lee into his apartment. I knew all his tricks. I might have even known him better than himself. That night, Lee didn't leave my building, and I'd gained a new jewelry collection. Thank you for watching. I'm not really sure what inspired this story, but it was really fun writing. It reminded me of one of my favorite shows, Dexter. Thank you to Juan for giving me writing pointers. So, goodbye for now, but not forever.